conflict. So we're going to go through that. Tim, we're going to talk about that.
It'll be memorable, Bruce. Yeah. At least it'll be memorable.
So for those who haven't met me that have joined, I'm Bruce McFarlane. I'm the CEO of BDC Partners. I'm also the principal of BDC Law, and I'm a co-founder of BDC Investments. I should share my screen. That would be what I needed to do. 1 minute. And then that you can see what I'm doing. How are we going? Can everyone see my screen now?
Looks good.
Got it.
Perfect. So just as part of our intro, so BDC is part of what we call the BDC Collective. So we've got the BDC entities across the top there. So BDC Property, we find sites for people, BDC Recruitment, BDC Performance, and talent acquisition. We do a number of different things. And then we're part of what we call BDC Collective. So today we're going to hear from Tim from Gap Maps. We've got associated projects, so Shop Fitters, we've got Hatch, Fordham's an accounting firm, Books 365, Benjamin and Little Giant Finance. So a range of different franchising and retailing professionals that we all work really closely together. We also have what we call BDC Investments. So we are part owners of a few different franchise systems now, and that just showing that because it's relevant. So Sinewave is a business that's an Australian franchisor for the Fast Signs group. Fast Signs is a global franchise system with about 900 franchisees globally, and we're part of that. And I'm fortunate to attend their conference in the US recently. And then Computer Explorer as well. That's based in the UK. We just acquired the rights for Australia, so it's a joint venture for Australia, and we've launched in the US as well. So there's Tim. Tim's on your screens. Tim is a director of market planning at Gap Maps. So Tim, you're in Australia at the moment. I'm assuming your travel plans are a bit stuck at the moment, given that you do spend a fair bit of time traveling the world. So welcome, Tim. And where are you?
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, in Melbourne today. Recently back from Singapore. I left the Middle East, fortunately, a month before the unrest. Let's call it unrest, or the war started, and planning to head to Mexico next month for our sort of introduction into the Mexican market.
Well, that's a bit. Yeah, there's you can hang out with all of the NBA players that have now finished their season, and they're all just going down to Mexico. So there'll be plenty of people there for you to hang out with. So for those of you who haven't joined one of our webinars before, we do have, there's raise the hand if you've got questions. Great. If you've got your camera on, fantastic. It's rather than a sort of presentation, and I'm going to turn these slides off in a sec. We don't have many more, but it's a discussion. So very interested in your input. There's lots of people that are on this call that have already launched overseas. So it's more of an interactive discussion than a kind of webinar, presentation webinar. So look forward to hearing your insights as well. But what we are going to cover today, so we're going to look at the strategy as to, why to go internationally, the structures. We'll talk about quickly different structures that people are using. Tim's going to talk about some of the research and the data that people use. We're also going to look at Asia first. And so Tim spends a fair bit of time in the Asian market, working with different clients there. I think you guys are about across like 35 countries. Is that right, Tim? Am I guessing?
Yeah, we are. We're just above 30 at the moment. Expanding currently into Latin America, which will bring us up to 35 by the end of the year.
Cool. And then I'm going to touch on some of what I've called the easier markets, which Tim laughed at when I called them that, but UK, Canada, US, are not always that easy. And then we've got case studies, which we'll talk about, and obviously we'd like to hear from everybody else as to your experiences, but I'm going to stop sharing there. So just to start off in terms of international expansion, the first thing is obviously strategy. So why? What's your purpose? Why do you want to go internationally? Obviously, it's great. It's exciting and you get to travel and go to some fun places, but that's probably not a great reason to do it. But having a really clear strategy. And I think the first step of developing that strategy is to actually to be really critical and have a self-assessment on your current business. So have a look at your current business. What are the products and or services that you're offering? who are the people in your business and what are their roles, and then how profitable is it, and how much capital do you actually have? So products, people, and profitability. Because looking at the Australian business, then to go, okay, how's this going to translate overseas? Are my products and services, easily accessible? Are they, common in other markets? Is it, do I have something unique that's unique to Australia that's going to be difficult to go overseas? The people, it's a big drain on resources, both from a financial point of view and also from a people point of view, and international expansion strategy. So do you have the right people in your business today? And we're going to talk about people overseas because obviously that feeds into your structure and stuff like that. But in your current business, whose job is it? Is it you as the founder, or is it someone else? Or is it, are you appointing someone that's going to run international? And that's tricky in a business, to take people, a good person out of that, and then particularly send them traveling around the world. And then capital and resources. It obviously, depending on your structure of how financially dependent the overseas markets are going to be on the Australian business, but do you have the financial capability to experience something going wrong overseas and draining a whole lot of cash in that market? So, that's the thing, they're the things that I get businesses to look at from their own business. But Tim, what about you when you're talking to people that are saying, I'm about to launch my global strategy? What things do you look at?
Well, I think, Bruce, one of the first things that I always ask our clients who are looking to expand internationally is really explore their unique selling proposition. So what is it that's unique about their brand that's going to resonate in these new markets? What is it in Australia, but also does it travel? Because what you don't want to be as you enter into Asia is really just a Me Too brand. There's got to be something unique that's different about your brand and compelling to bring your customers to your doorstep. I think the second thing that I always explore with our clients is then, who is their core customer group? Which consumers are they actually targeting? Because you may well be a mass market, you may be sort of targeting more mass market in Australia, but almost without exception, you won't be targeting mass market through Asia. That consuming class population, as we define it, is relatively small. Very small in countries like Vietnam or Philippines or even Indonesia. So you do need to be very targeted about who you're chasing as your core customer, and make sure that your proposition is going to appeal to them. So they're probably the two starting points, I'd say.
Andrew?
Tim, I just had a question with regards to the consuming class. Can you sort of elaborate a little bit further? Are you saying that at a certain point in Asia, they acquire enough wealth to actually have disposable income to make these discretionary purchases? For example, I'm from Schnitz, so for me, it's really important that we pick up, from the younger sort of teen demographics, middle sort of, early 20s, 30s, 40s, and then sort of the rest takes care of itself. So I'm just curious, like, what do you find in Asia is that that consuming class?
Yeah, it's a really good topic, Andrew. So for us, the way we define the consuming class at its entry point, it's where households have some level of discretionary retail spending power. So once they've paid for the essential and basic groceries and clothing and accommodation, there's some money left in the household budget to spend on something that might be considered discretionary. So an example we'll often provide is at the entry level into the consuming class, you might visit a fast food restaurant with your family for a child's birthday, for example. And that's kind of that tipping point when you start to get into the consuming class. And that tipping point can be quite small. So in Vietnam, as I mentioned, that's about 20% of the population. So 80% of the population across the country can't afford that sort of discretionary spending, even at that very basic level. In Malaysia, it's about 55% of the population. In Singapore, it's pretty much everybody except for the domestic workers that have come into the country. But of course, the further you get into that consuming class, the higher value those discretionary purchases can be and the more frequent they become. So for somebody, for a brand like Snitz, you're not targeting the entry level into the consuming class, you're targeting those that are well into the consuming class and even at what we call the premium consuming class, which are those individuals that frequently make those retail discretionary spending choices.
Anyone else? So Troy, you've ended up in the middle of my screen. I don't know if you can talk. You've obviously taken a brand, worked with brands as they've gone international. Just on the strategy piece, or can you hear me all right? Or is Peter? I see you've joined as well. You've taken the brand overseas. Anyone else that's got any that has actually already gone launched in other markets and looked at from a strategic point of view before we get into structure?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce, I was multitasking there.
Oh, no, that's why I dropped you in, mate. I knew you were doing something else.
It's like late in the evening here, so the kids just walked past and I was a bit distracted. But yes, we have bought a few brands to the US, and strategically, everything Tim was saying is very sound. And I think one thing I'd like to just add is that with the Poolworks brand, at least, when we started talking about that was 2012. We didn't actually enter the market till 2015. So there's a chunk of time that we don't often account for, that you probably need to consider, that the research is not just what you can pull off the internet. It's actually, having a chat with people,
Well, and actually the research is going over and spending some time there. I think, well, Andrew was Snitz, but I know with our Computer Explorers brand, Stuart's been going over for a couple of years, attending some events and without launching, just to really understand who are the buyers, who are the franchisees that are going to buy, and who are the right people to partner with. Because often, back to people, it's not just the people that you partner with, and we're going to get to structure in a sec about your master franchisee or your area developer. It's actually the other people that you're surrounding yourself with. Might be your lawyer, might be your other people that you need in the market. Tim, you need, who's the people? You've got contacts that are relationships as well that aren't necessarily, that don't do what you do in the market. So I think that research piece is important. I might move to structure now, just before we get to research, if that's okay, Tim.
Yeah, fine. We just got a question from Tarun.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Hi, Bruce. Hi, everyone. Just want to add on one more thing when you mentioned USP and class, especially in the, when it's about Snitz. There is different tiers of city as well, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and that is very, very crucial point that which you are targeting, because every city, like say, for example, India or any other part of Asia, there are only few congested markets and there is a lot of competition over there. So sometime when you are putting your brand in international market, at that time you should focus on which tier, 1, 2, 3. So generally, that gives you a bit of edge and lack of, like if you know that, okay, I can start with tier 3 even, or the tier 2. Tier 2 is generally the safest bet as compared to tier 1, although you get recognition at the tier 1 cities, because they are popular over there. So just to add on to your thing, Tim.
Thanks, John. And it's a good point. And later in the session, we'll talk about some of those easy countries, as Bruce mentioned. And from a data perspective, you look at India and just say, look at the size of that population and the size of the consuming class. It must be easy. But no, it's not. And for some of those reasons that you're starting to touch on there.
Yeah, easy. Thanks, guys.
So we can come back to strategy later, but sorry.
I just wanted to add one of the things that I actually used in the early days of just even how we register our trademarks and everything else. I was looking at which countries have a large number of McDonald's, because for me, what that told me was that the country has a legal structure and a legal system that can support franchising. But more than that, if you can afford a McDonald's burger and go out, it's a pretty good indication that you're in a spending class. You know what I mean? You've got someone who's willing to spend money and they can sustain it. So there's many countries that have over 1,000 McDonald's, the majority over 100, sort of in that bracket, 100 to 500. But it's just really interesting to note that there, it's. I guess we're going to talk about structure shortly, but having that structure so that franchising is respected. You've got a legal framework in which to, if you've got to deal with any issues, you can actually deal with it. They're not just going to, go down the other path. So it's I just think it's really important that's established as well in a country. So.
Well, it's part of and we're going to talk about research as well, but also research in terms of competitors, as we'll talk about then. Who's in the market already? So I might talk about structure now, just for a little bit. But so there's probably 4 main ones, but there's variations of all that, and I think people have slightly different definitions of what they all are anyway. So, a master franchising, where you appoint someone who's independent, generally they pay you, and then they go and find the franchisee. So they basically fulfill your role. So, as I mentioned before, we are the master franchisee for Fast Signs in Australia. So we are paying them a fee for the percentage of the royalties goes to them, but we're managing the franchisees in Australia. We're recruiting them, we're training them, but we are accessing information. So if you want to set your business up like that, that's obviously a very common way to do it, particularly in Asia. It's very uncommon to go to the US, and Troy's obviously in the US at the moment, but go to the US like this, to give the whole of the US to one person to be the master franchisee, possibly state-based, but it's just not a common way. Whereas it's a more common way for US brands when they come out to other countries and or go into to Australia or Asia to use that model. Area developer is often used to say you're appointing someone who's going to develop a particular area and open sites. So alternatively, some people use the term area developer as someone who's going to find franchisees for you, and they're going to sign a direct franchise agreement with the host country. So, client is I'm not sure if Dean's on the call. He registered for the call, but Dean is the area developer for Nautical Bowls in Australia. So Nautical Bowls is a US franchise system, and he's an area developer here. It's a bit of a hybrid model. He's opening sites, but he's also he's finding franchisees as well, which is more traditionally what you'd see in a master. So again, area developer has different people do use it differently. Joint venture, the same. Joint venture is something legally, it's independent companies coming together for a purpose of a joint purpose. Often used in franchising like a partnership. We're going to do this together, but generally it's just a company that you set up, that that you as the franchisor are a shareholder, and the other party, the operator in the market, is also a shareholder. So again, the legal definition and what's practically and commonly used are slightly different. But for example, joint venture. So we've done a joint venture with Computer Explorer. So we are operating the business in Australia. The franchisor in the UK owns 25% of the business. So it's not a master franchise. We did that because we wanted them to be actively involved in the business rather than paying and having an agreement that would expire as well. Direct entry, the last topic. Direct entry, again, could be setting up your own locations in a market as company owned, or it could be franchising directly from Australia. And I know Studio Pilates, for example, had launched in the US, and they're just franchising in different locations from probably a US entity, but it's from Australia. So they're supporting them from Australia, and they've appointed people on the ground to do different roles. But essentially, there's not an area developer or a master franchisee. So Tim, I know that was a bit of a blurry run through of 4 different areas, but what your thoughts on the types of structures?
Yeah, we work with about just under 200 brands across sort of Asia and the Middle East, helping them with growth strategy and growth planning. And so we see a lot of these different operating structures amongst that client group. Probably the most common one is the master franchisee, and we get involved with those clients. Sometimes they're a relatively mature business, sometimes it's a market entry, and sometimes there's sort of 6 or 10 or 12 stores established, and when we get involved at that point, and often to solve a problem. And I think that's the learning opportunity here. I think when you are selecting or trying to recruit a master franchisee, it's ensuring that you're recruiting somebody or partnering with somebody who's able to take the brand to where you want it to be through that planning cycle. Now, that might be a 5 or a 10-year period, but you need to make sure that your franchisee's got the capability to build your brand over that period to the point where you want it developed at the end of the period. The mistakes we often find are, a master franchisee is appointed that might be great for opening the first 5 or 6 stores, but they haven't had that operational expertise to run a network of 40 or 50 stores, or they don't have the financial backing to get to that point. So, the love diminishes over that first sort of year or two as suddenly those, the cracks in the relationship start to emerge.
Yeah.
And probably the final point there, Bruce, is to make sure that you help the franchisee to make some really good location decisions early on, because the worst thing for a growing system is to you have your first 6 or 7 stores developed and 3 of them are losing money.
I think that's the same as franchising in Australia. Yeah, you want to make sure that they're profitable, and unit economics are everything in the Australian market, but it's definitely when you go global as well. As soon as people aren't making money, whether it be the franchisees or the master franchisee. Janine Ellis with Boost rolled out a master franchising model very successfully. Not in every market. Some markets they didn't. They had a bit of a struggle in a couple of markets. And what they looked at, Jacinta and Janine, when they're involved in that, they looked at a proactive and a reactive strategy. So the proactive strategy, which we'll get to research later, but which are the markets that we think Boost Juice is going to go well in those markets, and then a reactive strategy, which everyone, Australian brands, particularly out of Asia, people come and businesses that aren't that mature often get approached that say, "Oh, will you franchise in whatever, the Middle East or Singapore or whatever," and you've only got half a dozen units in Australia. And so it's a reactive strategy. And sometimes those work. And I think, I've heard Janine Ellis speak about it, and she's got a couple of her best master franchisees that they weren't even thinking of. They didn't even really know where the country was. And all of a sudden someone's come to them and they've done their research as part of the due diligence and stuff like that. But, I think sort of tying strategy into structure, it's about understanding the partnerships. But either way, I think it's important to do the due diligence on whichever way you're going to go. You need to make sure that you're doing the due diligence on the person and the party and what have they done before. Tim and I, before the call, were talking about in the Middle East, there's brand accumulation businesses that are often just getting lots of brands, but they're not necessarily and it looks great. They've got whatever, Macca's and KFC or whatever they've got. Yeah. And they, and Schnitz on their logo.
I was going to say it's a great way to raise some capital before you go to other countries, from what I hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting, but I think, one of the other things that's pretty common in the US, and I'll let if Troy still hasn't got kids running around, but mumbos. So multi-unit, multi-brand operators is a big trend in the US, where you've got people that are, at a franchisee level operating multiple brands. And then I know that they talk about mums. So multi-unit, multi-sector operators. So again, platform private equity groups that are getting multiple brands and doing stuff. So that's the US. I know I've spent a bit of time there, but Tim, the same sort of thing in Asia. There's lots of different structures in place that are different from traditional structures, and how you're going to roll these out.
Exactly right. And I think, as you're touching on, Bruce, there's no one best structure. It is very much about what structure is best for each of the individual businesses. And to your point, do the research. Lift the hood, have a proper look, get the decision right, because it's very hard to unwind your choice of master franchisee in a painless way. Almost inevitably, it's going to be a painful separation that's really slowed or diminished the growth of the business over that period.
Yeah, and I won't dive into the legal stuff too much, but that the painful separation, if it ends up in a legal dispute in another market, is really tricky. And which, in terms of, as much as all the American master franchise agreements say that US law applies, it doesn't here. So you just if you're talking about the Middle East and Asian countries, have been really clear about what your jurisdictional clause says and what your dispute resolution clause says. So if you do need to, if it doesn't work out exactly as you liked, you can work, you've got a really clear strategy on how to get out of it. Any other comments or questions about structure before we move to research? Yep, Andrew.
You mentioned Mumbos, multi-unit, multi-brand operators. What was the last one? Mums, was it? Or
Yeah, multi-unit, multi-sector. So again, in the US, there's lots. I don't want to get too much into private equity, but private equity in the US is obviously, maybe 25 to 30% of brands are part of platform companies in the US now. So,
right.
But what's also happening is that private equity investment into franchisee brands. Ben and I were at the same. I don't know if anyone else from our group at IFA, when we were talking quite a bit about this with Fran Data, with the US. So they went through this, what's happening in the US, and but yeah, there's the guys that own Pizza Hut in Australia. What's the Flynn Group? They've got. Can you remember the number, Ben? It's like 2,900 or something franchisees across 15 brands. It's just randomly something like that. But they're also moving outside of food.
They just moved into fitness. They just bought into fitness.
How many brands did you say they manage, the Flynn Group?
15 or something.
Yeah.
15, okay.
They're franchisees.
219. I was like,
no. But they're franchisees. So they're so they Greg Flynn was inducted into the Hall of Fame while we were there. Ben and I were there at IFA, and he's moving in. But he also, it's Pizza Hut, isn't it, Dave, that he owns here? Yeah. He's the master franchisee for Pizza Hut in Australia now.
Mm-hmm.
So just Andrew, a comment to build on that the frustration for private equity in the US in the last 4 or 5 years has been more that they can't get their hands on the franchisor. So they are still seeing solid unit economics returns for their LPs. So they're moving towards the multi-unit groups because it still satisfies their investment mandate, but it doesn't have them sitting around on money that they can't invest because they can't find better assets.
Yep. This is a good point, Troy. Thanks.
So, Tim, we might go to research before. We'll come back to structure if anyone's got any other questions, but just in terms of research, that's obviously key to due diligence and understanding the markets that you're going into. So how do you approach that, Tim?
Yeah, but from a location intelligence perspective, I think that the starting point would be to say the data you have access to through Asia, Middle East, Latin America is just nothing like Australia. So don't go looking for Australian type of data set that they don't exist. But at the same time, don't use as an excuse not to research properly, because you can access some data of quite exceptional quality that will help frame up strategy, help frame up an execution plan for that strategy in terms of prioritized catchment identification, so that your brands can successfully transition from 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 20 outlets with a clear plan that helps guide them do that, backed by really solid data. Some of the points I'd make is, every country does have a census. It's not that they don't exist. There's always a census. Sometimes it's a 5-year cycle. Sometimes it's a 10-year cycle. What's different about the census in Asia, let's say in Asia or the Middle East compared to Australia, is primarily that there are no household income metrics that come through a census process. It's completely silent about household income and spending. So don't go looking for it. It's not there. Equally, the data that is available is not as what we call granular as what you find in Australia. So in Australia, we have mesh blocks and SA1s for those of us who are a little involved in this sector, but very small geography.
I was going to call you a nerd then. Is that all right?
Yeah, understood, and I wear it as a badge of honour. In Malaysia, for example, the data is released at what's called a Mukam level, and sometimes that's 500,000 people within the reporting area for census. So completely useless for retail store planning. But what it does mean is we can leverage mobile device data sets, a lot of mobile device movement data. We stitch it together with other data sets to create some quite compelling and granular insights around retail spending, for example. retail spending across different sort of categories like apparel, like food and beverage, grocery and other retail. So the insights are there. They can be teased out. They should be used to frame your strategy. It's just you can't approach it the same way that you can in Australia. So it's there, but it's different, and it's a lot better than not using it.
Can I ask a question, Tim? Just with regards to you've got mobile data, which I can appreciate, but what about say credit card data and other things like that? Is it typical that they're using cash in these countries as opposed to digital forms of payment that are trackable?
Yeah, there's a lot less. It varies country by country, of course, but India, it's pretty much all cash, for example. But what I would say, Andrew, and everybody, is that credit card data in the way that it's available in Australia, whether it's through those very CommBank IQ and others, it doesn't exist. So there is no credit card transaction data that you can use as part of a retail site strategy process or site feasibility process. But mobile device data, for example, we're doing a lot of work at the moment with foot traffic activity. So we're able to identify foot traffic count across pedestrian precincts in targeted retail catchments. Really helpful, and we can do that in Vietnam as well as we can in Australia, for example. We also use, and I think it's something you touched on earlier, Andrew, we do a lot of retail brand adjacencies to help identify and prioritize some of those areas. So for Snits, for example, if Snits were to open in Vietnam, then we'd be looking for areas where there are other established sort of fast casual premium dining establishments that you can anchor onto, because the Snits brand right now in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi won't be strong enough to bring people to your doorstep. So you've got to associate with other brands. That sort of data is available to us across all of Southeast Asia and helps inform some of that strategy. And Andy, I can see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for all of the information, Bruce and Tim and the others. It's been great so far. Just a quick question, Tim. What, from a large language model perspective, the likes of Claude, Anthropic's Claude, and Gemini, and of course ChatGPT, as well as the Claude coding kind of sort of revolution which has happened over the last month, and the ability to scrape a lot of data. Like, what tools are you seeing that are available to really help here? How good are they? And are you noticing a difference in kind of the price point of some of these software, due to the ability to kind of create that bespoke software under products like, Claude Code and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, great question. And it's a revolution, and it's happening really quickly. So big data has been around for some time now, and I think AI is giving us access to broader data sets and a different range of opinions. What doesn't change is the fundamentals behind location strategy development, so development of a market plan and development of an execution plan. That said, AI can make a lot of those insights a lot more accessible to us. And let me give you an example. So at GapMaps, we do a lot of research, we build a lot of data, we work on a lot of strategy development for clients, and often it sits in very big worksheets with millions of rows of data, and from that we'll do regression analysis and multivariate analysis and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, Bruce, getting a little bit nerdy, but really complex, lots of modeling that goes into developing a plan. Now, to structure that in a way that the client can actually execute can be quite challenging. And often the questions that the client will have are questions post-research or post-strategy they don't sit in a slide pack, and they don't easily sit in a platform. But by building an AI interface that accesses all of GapMap's data, plus all of those workbooks that we've worked on for that client, that it enables a client, for example, and he just say, I'm looking at location X, how does that compare to other locations that GapMaps recommended through its strategy? And the AI will give you a really good answer to that, based in data, drawing on the research, drawing on all that information that sits in all of those workbooks, and give you a really informed answer. So we're seeing that as the big opportunity. It's enabling clients to more easily extract insights from data rather than just our view of the insights of the data that were informed as part of that strategy project. So really exciting. Just another simple example though of how AI is changing what we're doing. We have just, some of you I know are GapMaps clients, but we've now reskinned our GapMaps platform in 10 different languages, including Arabic and Spanish and a whole bunch of languages that our clients get a lot of benefit from. We tried to do that with our development team a number of years ago, and the size of the project was just too complex. It was too hard for us to do and prioritize, but AI has done it for us essentially in 2 months. We were able to do what we couldn't even contemplate doing 2 years ago. So quite amazing what AI is enabling through the sector.
Yep. Quick one. China has WeChat, as we know, and that's kind of their everything platform. It's everyone makes payments through it and so forth. I mean, this is probably, I know the answer, I'm guessing, but is there access to information like WeChat, or is it just locked down government? You know what I mean? Like,
no. The only, I mean, the credit card transaction data in Australia doesn't exist, but it's like in the US, for example, credit card transaction data is available sort of next level compared to Australia. So you can know, for example, exactly what the sales are happening in every Starbucks location across the country if you want to buy it. The data's there. So we've got clients who say, we don't need a location strategy process so much because our strategy is just go where there's a high-performing Starbucks. And they've got the Starbucks turnover numbers because the transactions are all digital. And in that sort of movement of the data from the store through the POS to the bank, at that point, the data ownership is available for others to look at and sell the data. So Starbucks aren't really consenting to the sale of the data, but it's still being aggregated and sold. So different everywhere, Andrew. But just don't even bother looking for it in Asia. It's just going to be disappointing.
Any other questions on the research before we sort of dive a little bit more into Asia as a all good? Well, so Tim. So obviously you've spent a lot of time in Asia and lots of different Asian countries, and we don't have time to do every. It's a broad question, but sort of I guess working out of building a strategy in Asia compared to what your domestic strategy might look like in Australia. What sort of things are you working with clients on?
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally, if you look at what are the hot spots in Asia and where is most of the interest, the first point to make is that overall population growth isn't such a factor in Southeast Asia anymore. They're not growing. The countries are not growing rapidly. But what is changing and changing quite rapidly is the growth of this consuming class. And that's what's driving interest from a lot of brands to enter into markets like Vietnam and Indonesia and Philippines and others. So it's the opportunity is to be quite targeted around those areas of relatively high growth of this addressable market or consuming class market. And just to give you a couple of numbers there, because the numbers are quite compelling. In India, let's start with India, for example, the growth in that consuming class per annum is around 45 to 50 million a year, 50 million people a year. So last year, not consuming class, this year, consuming class. So massive numbers. But even in a country like Indonesia, that consuming class growth is about 6 to 8 million people a year are being added into that consuming class. Some of the other interesting ones, Philippines, about 3 million people a year entering the consuming class. Vietnam comes up quite often, again, 3 to 4 million people a year entering the consuming class. So that's what's attracting a lot of brands. And some of the bigger brands that we work with, like a Chargee or like a Zeus coffee or a Pickup coffee, explosive growth. Their Copycanagan is another one. Explosive growth, really targeting that consuming class population and the growth in that consuming class population through Asia. So I think the interesting part for every brand is to say, well, I know where the growth is happening, and we can help guide you where within a country that growth is happening, whether it's in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. Picking up on one of the other comments, but it's also recognizing that don't necessarily want to chase the fastest growing countries like in India, for example. Yes, massive numbers, but India is a very fragmented country. I think you need to be very targeted about where to go into India. It's probably one of the countries that we've found most difficult to trade successfully in. But brands are doing it, but you need a lot of resource to do it well.
Yep, Troy?
Yeah, Tim, just a quick question. Any relative data between that move into a different income bracket and the relationship between that and discretionary income? Have you come across that?
Well, I think it depends. Of course, it depends on the brand and the product. In a perfect world, there would be additional data sets that allow you to identify your target market beyond sort of consuming and premium consuming class. For example, if you use India, for example, a lot of that premium consuming class, or SECA population, as it would be referred to in India, it skews to sort of some older traditional families, and they're not consumers of fast food, for example. So they've got the money to buy fast food or fast casual, but they choose not to. Yeah, they've got the money to shop at Uniqlo or Zara or some of those Western fashion brands, but they choose not to. Yeah, the preference is still more towards some of the ethnic wear options. So I think, again, Troy, it's there. In that case, it's looking at other data sets that help tease that out. So the premium consuming class doesn't answer it. But in terms of your retail site selection, it's where are there other brands that are appealing to the same consumer that I want to attract into my store, whether it's a fitness club or whether it's a coffee outlet or whether it's a fast food outlet, it doesn't really matter. It's putting your brand in amongst those other brands that are doing the heavy lifting and bringing those customers to your doorstep. At that point, you've got an opportunity to sell to them.
Not good. Thank you.
Andrew?
Tim, can I ask, in Asia, are the younger demographics, let's say teens and young adults, are they going out to restaurants and buying entertainment like movies and other things like that, or buying consumer electronics, or do you find that you really have to be in that consuming class before they start spending serious money, or is there still, like, the parents, like in here in Australia, parents often give the kids money, pocket money, so they can go and buy food and whatever else? I'm just curious, like, what's culturally, what's that sort of expectation in Asia?
Well, I think consuming class has to come first, because as much as a teenager in a family might like to purchase bubble tea or whatever it might, the product that appeals to them, if the family doesn't have the money, the kid's not able to do the spending, and we see, and obviously there's a lot of that. Right? So the starting point is your consuming and your premium consuming class, and then it's those areas where there are children, and then you see very successful brands that are selling you the bubble teas and the fast food and those other things that attract that younger demographic. There's brands like Gaga at the moment in Thailand, expanding very rapidly. Very strongly branded, very carefully targeted at that young, higher income consumer. Now, of course, at that age, you don't need a massive income to buy bubble tea. It's not cheap in the local context, but those 16, 17, 18-year-olds and students will spend a relatively large amount of their discretionary spending on a bubble tea, for example. So they'll prioritize that over other things because it's the product they're really chasing. And I guess that's not so different to Australia, where you see the queues of the private school kids outside those similar sorts of stores in Camberwell Junction.
Yochi.
Or Yochi. I was going to say Yochi, or one of the
the Ellisons have nailed that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions on Asia, hot Asian, which is the countries and why? Andrew, go again.
Yeah, that's a great question. What are the countries? I mean, Schnitzer's got trademarks in 60 countries now, including like 600 domain names, which I get shit for all the time, by the way, by my team. They're always giving me like, why do you keep registering domain names, Andrew? But they don't realize what a great asset domain names and country-specific domain names are, especially as we expand our brand sort of internationally. So I'm just curious, what would be the hot countries now if you were to sort of follow the sun, say from New Zealand and go through. We're planning to go into New Zealand. We've been invited, by Emirates Retail to go to a few locations. But I'm just curious, what would you recommend would be sort of the key countries that we should target? One of the ones we're considering genuinely is actually China, but right now the economic, climate isn't, and social climate isn't the best, just with all the tension and everything else. I'm just curious, like what would you consider?
The one we see the most activity in from that sort of fast casual sort of space is probably Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines. They're the big three. The reason for that is there's a good solid base of consuming class residents in those countries already. There are some really large cities that make it relatively easy to get in and get scale relatively quickly. So whether it's Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi, where you're going to start in Vietnam, Manila, of course, in the Philippines, and you're a long way to getting started. And similarly in Indonesia, Jakarta's 20+ million people. And then you've still got another 7 or 8 cities of more than 2 million people. So
what about this starting at this with Singapore? Is that something that seems to be quite common as a base to go into other countries?
You can, Bruce. I mean, we don't see much of it actually. It is possible to do it that way. The reason why a lot of our clients wouldn't prioritize Singapore first is that what you learn from Singapore isn't going to help you much anywhere else.
No, but it's easier.
That's right. It's easy, no doubt easier, but limited in terms of growth opportunity. Where what you learn in the Philippines will absolutely help you in Vietnam, in Thailand, and other countries thereafter. So that seems to be the primary reason why brands are looking at those other markets first.
And what about Japan? Sorry, Andy, just really quickly. What about Japan?
Yeah, I was going to.
To be honest, Japan, we're actually building out our platform and services for Japan. We'll be starting trade in sort of June. And so maybe ask after, this time next year, I'll have a really informed view for you. But right now, wouldn't like to say.
Yeah, because I think that with the US and franchising influence in both Japan and South Korea, as to markets that seemed easy but aren't.
Yeah.
Andy, sorry.
And I was just going to ask about Hong Kong. Tim, I mean, obviously Hong Kong's undergone massive changes since 1997. More recently, probably in the last 5 years, a lot more control being exerted from the mainland. I did see something this week, though, which really showed that I think with it might be IPOs in Hong Kong, especially in the AI space, have started to rebound very, very strongly, which, I didn't want to get carried away, but it looks like maybe that's an early indication of something positive happening for Hong Kong sort of economically. So I just wondered about your view on Hong Kong, obviously very close to the mainland. Like clearly there are a whole bunch of security laws, I think probably what Andrew alluded to before, which have been really, really quickly rolled out and very strongly rolled out. So with all of that said, what's your view on Hong Kong?
I think, Andy, it's got a lot to do with your risk profile. I mean, our view would be, why would you do Hong Kong with all the risk that comes with Hong Kong being where it is in the adjacency to China versus other opportunities in
Vietnam,
Indonesia and others. I mean, so it's about if you're already in those other markets and fully penetrated, and then Hong Kong, sure, why not? But if that's your first entry point into Asia, I think there'd be a real question about, is that really the best spot to start? And almost always, I reckon the answer's got to be no.
Tim, I might just quickly jump to other countries, which I know I want your input in as well. But the easy markets, the English-speaking countries, so New Zealand obviously is the easiest market in that it's close, similar time zone. I think probably the starting point of all the easy markets is Australia is probably the most regulated country in the world in terms of franchising. All of you on this call that are franchisors, you have to deal with changes to the code regularly. And so you're used to regulation and compliance to operating your business. So when you go into other countries like New Zealand, where there's a voluntary code rather than a mandatory code, it makes it seem very easy. So I think that as a starting point, regulation and laws is one thing to think about. Obviously, language and time zones and culture and all those sorts of things with New Zealand are quite similar. But New Zealand, and anyone is on the call, jump in if you've had a similar experience. But it's a small market, and it's like it can cost as much time and money to get yourself organised. New Zealanders love New Zealand brands. They love their own brands, and so it's not just because there's only 5 million people doesn't mean it's not a competitive market for an Australian brand going in there. And again, I'm going to use a Boost example, but Boost really struggled in New Zealand when they went there because it wasn't as easy as they thought. I'll jump to some others and then I'll come back to you, Tim. That's all right. But the UK, again, obviously culturally we're very similar, but since post-Brexit, there's a lot of complexity in terms of laws and regulations and stuff like that. It's very competitive. There's, 5 million people or 67 million people. But the American brands have been going there for a while. And then there's a lot of domestic brands as well. So, you've got, laws around employment law and food standards and safe supply chain issues and all these sorts of things. So it can be tricky, and it's obviously a really shit time zone for it because it's on the other side of the world. Canada, similar, very similar culture to us. Similar amount of people. Most people in whatever it is, half a dozen big cities, all pretty close to the US border. Obviously, the French-speaking part's a bit trickier, but there's lots of reasons why Canada is a very good place to enter the market. But again, it's big and spread out, and the American brands are all there as well. So, it has its challenges. And then finishing off for the US, and I'll get your comments as well, Troy, but later on, but US is 50 countries. Like, it's really tricky. There's a lot of laws. There's federal laws, and then there's state-based laws in 14 states with different franchising regulations. And so it's pretty tricky. And so anyone that thinks that, that go there and it's because it's, the US very well, it's a lot of research to enter the US market. And lots of Australian brands have gone and failed. Baker's Delight's probably the one. I've heard Roger Gillespie talk about it a couple of times. I think maybe 3 times. Dave, you might know the answer to this, but Baker's Delight, they're in Canada and they've got Cobbs and it's gone really well. But even their US expansion this time around, it's been tricky for them. And that's I don't know how many they've got here, 750. It's a super successful brand here in Australia. So I think the US is a topic in itself. We ran a session on US expansion, a face-to-face session recently, but there's a lot of work to be done if you're looking to go to the US, and we've just launched there and we're having a lot of fun already in Florida. Tim, what about the easy countries?
I think you've probably just listed off some of the most difficult countries to enter into. So simplistically, high level sounds easy. Reality is very complex for a whole lot of reasons. Probably the one I would highlight is there is no growth in that consuming class in those countries. It's flat. So you've got to really fight to find your customer and service them, and you've got to shove somebody else out of the way to grab those customers. So that, putting aside the legal framework and all those other things, that's always hard. You got to fight harder for your customer versus those other countries we've talked about, where every year you've got another 3 or 4 million potential consumers for your brand in those markets. So, for a whole host of reasons, yes, it might be attractive to be in those countries, but it's not easy, not by any stretch.
Troy, we'll go to you. I'll do Andrew a question in a sec. I'm just going to, Troy, if you're still there, are you in Florida at the moment?
Yes, I am, mate. Yeah, we just got back about 2 months ago. So we've been traveling for quite some time, as you know, and so we've back and settled.
So you're entering the US, you've seen a lot of brands into the North American market.
I've got 2 quick comments. One is to the relationship. Just because we speak English doesn't mean we're the same. Dom and I, my wife Dominique and I have always had a statement here that never a resident, always a guest. And we're both citizens now, but we still have this assimilation issue that you deal with every day. And as a franchisor, it's really important to not think you can just throw your Australians into America and everything will be okay, because it's not. And the second thing I just ask everyone to consider is that it just takes a lot longer to understand the things you have to change to be here. And one of the things you have to change to be here is to be here. The American market doesn't look at you as being serious if you're trying to run it from Australia, if you're thinking it'll be okay just to dial in twice a day. You've got to set up a presence, or they think you're going home, and largely because lots of Australians do. And so it's, tough love, but that's the way it is. And we got here in 2008, and for the first 3 years, everyone said, "Oh, you're still here," thinking that we weren't going to make it and we were going home. So few things to think about there as you put your strategy together, because it'll just take everything a little bit longer, a little bit harder, a little bit more money.
It's something like 100 brands launched in the US every year from globally or domestically and globally. And so, there's a lot of new businesses, and there's still only maybe 4,500 brands in the US. So there's a lot come and go. Andrew, sorry, your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask structurally, in my mind's eye, I was thinking if we're going to go to the US, you'd really want to partner with operators like master franchise operators that have a proven track record, that understand the lay of the land for every state. Like each individually, they might operate in 3 states and have proven, restaurants or other operations, retail food operations, that they can demonstrate that they've got support for. But I think it's too risky a market to try and do it on your own. And what you said, Troy, is absolutely 100% on the money. When you go to America, it's funny. They want to meet with the owners. They want to meet with the developers. There's this weird thing where they have to know who's behind the operation, what I found. And that's what was told to me as well by everyone I spoke to. They're like, we need to see the face of the people behind the brand. Otherwise, you're not going to cut it. And I don't know if you found the same thing, but that's my research. So.
Yeah, and look, at a 20-second build on Tim's comments earlier. There are 2 animals here. The master franchisee, we've observed anyway, typically is the operator that actually knows the sector, knows what they're doing, knows how to build it. The area developer is the investor, who has a passion or an interest in the sector, not necessarily an understanding of the sector, but they got a bunch of dough and they want to go hard in an area that's close to home to make them look like heroes. So they're 2 different kind of animals, but it comes back to what Tim was saying earlier. You just got to find your partner that suits you and your vision, and you're halfway home.
Cool. Tim, have you got any other closing comments or?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, Bruce. It's just, again, spend some time on the research. You can't spend too much time researching which country to go into and why, because once you're there, you're there. Yeah, exiting is difficult. So, yeah, do the research up front.
Cool. Andy, you can be our last. We're right 1 minute to go. So last question, I think, from you, and then if anyone else has got one more.
Thank you. Yeah, point taken, Bruce. I'll keep it quick. Look, Tim, appreciate everything you said there around research. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, Bruce, is kind of where you started around self-assessment. And we've kind of just gone through this. We're a very new, small franchise. It's my wife's business called Social Mums Club. And we had three opportunities in the US, ladies that we know who said, we want to buy in. And it's bloody tempting. But actually, our self-assessment showed, once you get past the ego, our self-assessment showed that as a business here in Australia, we are just, even though we've got 25 franchises, we've only been franchising 18 months, we are not ready to make an investment like that over there and actually make it work. So, yeah, really appreciate your comments on that self-assessment, and I feel a little bit validated, Bruce, because it was a hard decision. So, thank you.
I think there's lots of brands, and I mentioned that get approached, and it's like, yep, let's do it. But it's really understanding where you are as a business. And I know, Ben's on this call, and he's been to 5 AFAs doing his research, but he's not ready, hasn't launched because there's work to be done. So, any other questions or comments? But thank you very much. I'll just really quickly, I just wanted to thank all of you for putting this together. It's been very insightful.
I've got no experience in international franchising. However, my CEO, Kerry Wayne, she's taken brands into 20 countries. I've got other team members on our team who've done, 3 or 5 different countries. So I think together we can figure this out together with you guys. And Tim, we've been working with Gap Maps now for about 15 years, I think. So I remember the software in the early days, helping Anthony sort of fine tune the software, so it worked for us out, the franchisors. So definitely love your software, and I would love to see what you've done internationally as well, to see how it varies from the very detailed work that you do here in Australia. So if you could reach out to me, I'd really appreciate that. And I encourage anyone else, if you're not using Gap Maps, use it. And they didn't pay me to say that, by the way.
Jesus, I know. he gets a discount on his fees.
I just get a bucket of money with you guys.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks. We've got another webinar coming up. It's like a very different topic. So it's around property and site selection, and also what sort of products you can use to save yourself some money for the site. So I would hopefully we'll see you there, and our property and Benjamin are doing that. But everybody else, thank you very much. And obviously launching in the middle of a war, good luck with that. So probably not launching in the Middle East right at the minute. So thank you very much. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks.